Volume 6 C32. Skarna woke up to find her shirt and boots missing, and an elf spooning against her back. Did we? Skarna touched her forehead. It was a mild pain. Her memories. Blurs of each other, like beings made out of fuzz with no features, flashes, a second here, a half a minute there, but it was inconsistent. One thing that stood out, right, she cleaned me up. That's why my shirt is missing, and my boots are off. She closed her eyes. She really is a good one. It's hard to believe she actually hates humans. Skarna reflected and stroked the hand that was draped over her side. She'd probably put me like this so I wouldn't choke if I threw up again. Hell of a way to go, choking on my own vomit while passed out drunk. She rolled her bright green eyes at her own foolishness, and then smiled a little while stroking the hand that held her fast. What a damn fool I am, Skarna whispered under her breath. She was answered immediately. How do you not sound like you have a massive hangover? Ileana asked, and were you thinking of doing something dirty with my hand? Skarna almost jumped out of her skin. How did you? She began, but Ileana sat up and wiggled her long elven ears. For good measure, the elf pointed at them, and her little smile got a little bit bigger. It made the woman radiant beyond measure. Her eyes had lost the grey and listless look they once held, and they were bright as the afternoon sky. Did you forget? Ileana asked. Right. Elf senses, Skarna chuckled and then pressed her forefinger against her own forehead, and human liquor tolerance. It's a little fuzzy, last night I mean, and I have a tiny little throb, but it's nothing for me. You elves may be able to become hard drinkers over centuries, but you've not got our natural talent, she said and sprang to her feet. She reached down to grab her shirt, then put both it and her boots on while Ileana laced up her own. Do you think the doppelgangers are okay? Ileana asked when she straightened up. They're summoned so. Most likely they've faked their deaths. Or are those real deaths? Do the same ones get summoned every time? Skarna wondered and scratched her head with a quizzical look. I don't know much about magic. Right. They probably just disappeared and didn't get caught at all, but that should mean we've got some time on our hands until Our Lady comes back. Ileana reflected out loud and flashed a winning smile at her companion. So. She went to the purse that was left dangling on the edge of a chair and fished around within the black bag. Why don't we treat ourselves? She pulled out a handful of coins, then froze. The smile vanished. Ileana? Skarna asked. Did you hear that? Ileana asked with a dreadful whisper. That's a lot of armor out there. The elf woman's naturally light-skinned face paled further. Skarna shook her head, but went to the window saying, it's probably nothing. The ruler of the kingdom of Nazarick is here. It could be about that? She opened the shutters and looked out the window, and immediately she knew that wasn't it. Outside, groups of steel-clad soldiers with long pikes were blocking roads and corners in both directions. A wagon full of them, plus men on horseback, were drawing to a sudden stop just out of view. Even her human senses could pick up the noise of their shouting. There's a chance it's not for us, but this place was supposed to get found. Just not yet. Not yet. We should have had days. Skarna squeaked out. Ileana was already trembling, her lip quivering. No. No. I can't go back. I can't. I can't ever let it happen again. Ileana was frozen, her breath was quickening into a frenzy, her happiness melted away. She dropped the clinking golden coins from her fingers. They clinked together on the wooden floor. Skarna looked at her companion, and rushed to face her. Listen to me, she snapped, and brought her hand up. When Ileana didn't respond, Skarna did the only thing she could think of. She brought the hand down across Ileana's face in a slap, snapping the elf's face to one side. Ileana's eyes cleared up. She touched a hand to the place where the palm print was already reddening her pale skin. Listen to me, Skarna hissed again. You're going to get out of this. Just keep an eye out the window. Keep an eye out, and take the chance when it comes. You'll be fine. Call for our mistress. Nobody knows her, nobody will have seen her. Just call for her as soon as you're safe. The shouting was audible downstairs as patrons, guests, and workers alike grew alarmed beyond measure. Skarna rushed to the wall, snatched up her sword, and then rushed back to Ileana. She dragged the elf to the side of the window. Just watch. Skarna gave it as an order. Ileana's hand still touched the place where she'd been slapped, and then 1 instant later, Skarna pressed her lips to those of the elf. The scent of fall apples and fresh spring, the feel of warm summer breezes. She took it all from the first intimate contact with her companion, tasting her lips and holding her arm around the woman for one tight, fierce embrace. She then charged for the front door, flinging it open as loud as she could, then charging toward the steps with a bellowing fury. "Fuck you. Fuck the lot of you. Blasphemers!" Skarna roared, the accusation that would surely be remembered the moment she saw the knights coming up the stairs. One swift kick, they tumbled down, caught off guard by the sudden aggression. They were frozen in the moment her foot connected with the face of the man in front. Down they tumbled like dominoes of steel, their arms and legs a tangle, their weapons clattering and clanging. Skarna ran over them as if they were the stairs, jumping the last few steps and landing with a dancer's grace on the bottom floor. A knight charged her before the rest of his companions realized they were even under attack, and activated lesser agility boost, greater grace. They were not the most potent martial arts, but they did enhance what Skarna was already good at. Her sword danced like a bee in the air, and quickly both the knight's eyes were gone before his lumbering strike could even recover after she adroitly avoided his first failure. His companions came to their senses, and Skarna had the balls to laugh at them. She kicked a table over, grabbed a chair of wood with her free hand and flung it into the face of another, sending another trio down into a pile atop the screaming blind man who clutched at the place his eyes used to be. "So long, losers!" Skarna shouted and ran not for the door, but for an open window. She dove headfirst through it and rolled out into the street. Coming up on her feet, she cursed out loud when she saw the rest of them. That'll buy her time, Skarna thought, and began to run. They chased after her. Men in heavy armor were not the fastest, but the horses, those won't be but a few seconds behind me. She looked over her shoulder. Heavy armor or not, they were strong. Her legs pumped until the guards ahead, intended to cut off both sides of the street, made their advance. "All right, you bastards. You want me? Come and get me," Skarna shouted and picked up a stray bit of horse manure. She flung it into the face of the man nearest to her, then darted off toward an alley. They lined up 4 abreast, and advanced down the dead end. Skarna looked at the wall ahead, then on either side of her, not even any crates. "I could go up top, but fuck," she cursed, "if I do that." She whirled to face them, teeth bared in a snarl. "The gods curse your stinking country," she hissed, spat into the muck of the dank alley, and charged the advancing 4. Her sword darted out, deflecting the jabs of their long pikes, at least as best she could. 4 more fell in behind the first, and raised their pikes up to shoulder height, then 4 more behind those, raising their pikes up to head height. A wall of steel points were inching toward her. Little sharp jabs she could turn aside individually, became multiples. Her shirt ripped open and blood began to run down her breast. "Please have gone. Please. Please." Skarna prayed to nothing, as there was nothing left that she believed in. Her eyes welled up and she blinked her tears of anger away. She yelped as her arm took a gash from a thrust and switched to her other hand to use the sword again. The knights murmured, and Skarna's predatory smile returned. Ambidextrous folk were both dangerous and rare. She caught a knight in the eye again, but no sooner did he go down than the one behind took his place and she was forced farther and farther back. She glanced behind her. The rear wall was closing in. The blood loss from a dozen wounds was taking its toll. She stepped several paces back, then held out her sword as if she were going to hand it over. The knights hesitated, doubt etched on their faces as her vigor and defiance seemed to simply vanish. Skarna snarled with fury and shouted, "Okay, fine. I heard this line as a girl and I always wanted to say it. Surrender." One of the knights called in that brief space of time. "Your mother should surrender, you shiny polished shit," Skarna yelled and ran to the wall. Using all her acrobatic skill, she planted one foot on the wall, pushed off, caught the nearest wall with her other foot, and flipped head over heels toward the lot of them with her sword held in both hands, back arched, legs back, and howling, "You'll never take me alive." The pikes of those raised aloft are what caught her alive, until she sank on them. The metal pierced her armorless body like a knife through butter. The weight of her own flesh ensured she was completely impaled. It tore through her chest and came out her back, and then brought her down to lie on the filth of the alley. The knight dropped his pike, his fingers shaking. The groaning of his comrade at his back was fading as a unit magic caster healed him. "She's dead?" he asked. His commander smacked him on the back of his helmeted head with the palm of his hand. "Your pike is through her heart," he said, and gave the limp body of the auburn-haired woman a nudge with the toe of his boot. "What do you think, idiot? So, who do you think she was? The soldier asked as he crouched down to draw the pike from her body with a sickened squelch and the sound of tearing meat. The commander nudged her corpse over from its side onto its back and looked down at the hollow, vacant eyes. I don't know, who can say? We'll probably never figure that out, but she sure sounded a lot like Theocracy to me. They're fanatics over there. Probably from one of their intelligence scriptures. Maybe a Ganti or something. The commander muttered. Secure the area. The commander shouted, trying to disguise the nervousness in his own voice while he pushed his way between his clustered comrades and sped without quite running, out of the dark alley and back into the street. As soon as Skarna ran out the door, Ileana rushed to grab a cloak that would hide her appearance. She then rushed to the window and watched. There was no further noise coming her way, the clatter and chaos. She can't be. Ileana thought and shook her head until the corner of her eye caught sight of Skarna in the street. No, she can't. She can't be. Ileana whimpered but kept quiet. The loud distraction of her companion drew everyone's attention, but for just a moment, Ileana thought, she's going to leave me behind. The human hurled manure at the nearest guard, and that frantic fear that pounded through the elf woman's chest was turned to a heart-rending silent wail when she saw that, rather than a way, Skarna turned down an alley they both knew had a dead end. The guards followed, save for a few who took positions to keep the traffic at bay, but they faced the wrong direction. The rest were after Skarna. Stay safe. She begged the gods, and with nobody looking in her direction, Ileana climbed out the window and with one deft jump, caught the overhanging roof. She hauled herself up as silently as she could, and began to run, leaping from rooftop to rooftop. She stopped and flicked her ears up, secure in the certainty that nobody was around, and listened. Come on. You can jump up here too. You might need a little help from the walls, but I know you can do this. Ileana went to her knees and bowed her head. She clasped her hands together. Please. Please gods. Any of you. Hear my prayer. Salve. The prayer died in her throat. Skarna's shout and curse of final defiance died in a half-scream that became tomb silent. No. She's not dead. She's not. She should have made it. Ileana whispered her defiance of the world's truth, then scrambled to her feet, turned, and ran as she listened to the distant guards talk about Skarna as a corpse. She stayed down there to keep me safe up here. Why? No. It's not fair. It's not fair. It's not fair. She wailed in her mind and touched her lips where one last frantic touch had come and gone, and she did not stop until she was across the city and able to hide in another alley. She found a place in the dark, an old barrel behind a shop. She snuck inside, pulled the lid of the barrel over top of her head, and wept quietly in the darkness until the sun finally began to set. Volume 6 C33. Me? What do you mean, me? Ines asked. His heart began to race for a very different reason. He cocked his head. You're joking. Aren't you? He flashed a doubtful smile at the pair, but Kalka shook her head. No, Ains. All of these are dated after our refusal to condemn you for your treatment of non-humans. We wouldn't sign what they hoped would be a joint statement of nations that would pressure you into extermination or subjugation. And I can only think that this was why. They wanted a government that would take a hard line against any kind of demi-human tolerance. Ines relaxed, his heartbeat began to slow and he looked down at the fur blanket over his lower body. Queen Kalka held the paper back out to Kellet, and Ines said, I am sorry for our part in all this. Your part? Kellet asked with a sudden surprise on her face with blinking eyes that tried very hard not to look at the naked king, even covered up. Yes, it seems your unintended friendship with us, your neutrality with our policies must have caused some concern in some quarters, Ines said and rubbed the light fuzz of unshaven hair on his jaw. I suppose your analysis must be correct. As expected of the Queen. He cleared his throat and asked, how does this change the future for you? It was a telling question, one that set both Kalka and Kellet on edge. The brown-haired caster took a step toward her queen and without thinking, put a hand on the small of her back when the queen faced Ines. Kalka's eyes fell away from him and down to the floor. Her hands folded together in front of her waist, then, as absent of thought as Kellet, both hands went up toward her belly where her palms pressed softly against the cloth and toward the flesh beneath. Am I queen? Kellet asked. Banished emotion roared back in her eyes as a war waged in the mind of the woman who embodied a country. It doesn't. She finally answered. We can foil them, uncover the proof we need, but even so, I doubt that Astraka will lay down his arms so easily, and even if he does, what about the Queen of Frost? If we aborted everything we planned, everything we did up to now, she remains a problem. Even if all of those things are solved, what then? It won't be fine. Suppose we fight and defeat the Frost Queen. We weaken the demi-humans, the theocracy finishes the elves, they then use their elite units, which are better than ours, to finish our weakened enemy. Where will we be then? Kalka exclaimed, and Ainz moved, not out of the bed, but to the side of it, bringing his legs over to one side and covering his lap with the fur. He held out his hand to the queen, her eyes were filled with righteous anger as she deduced the possibilities of years in seconds. She truly is a gifted queen. Put this way, the theocracy were fools not to do just this. He reflected and mentally downgraded his estimation of the theocracy government several rungs by the time she came away from Kellett and instead took the hand of her king. I will be your queen, as I have promised. My people will be your people, and yours, mine. I will. She looked away from Ainz over her shoulder, toward Kellett, who gave a subtle nod. I will force the temples to accept non-human equality under the law, offer trade to the demi-humans, free passage to the east or west. This will leave only one thing to worry about from demi-humans, Kalka sighed as she ran out of steam. My sister. Remedios. Kellett admitted, and then her time standing as stiff as a statue in the background, came to an end. She approached the king and queen, and went down to both knees. She is my sister. The advisor emphasized. She may be an idiot, a fool, a moron, a thundering incompetent, is this going somewhere? Ainz interjected. Kellett's eyes blinked like mad as she began to lose her battle against the tears she'd struggled to hold back. Your Majesties. Please. I beg you for her life. Must I lose everything? She choked the last word out. I have no family left. I know who she is, what she has done. But please. Please don't take her life. Kellett begged and lowered her face to the floor with her hands cast forward. How many have already died for her? Ainz asked with pity, and bending down, he placed a hand on Kellett's head. My husband-to-be. Ainz. Can't you think of something? Kalka asked in a tiny little voice devoid of her earlier fire. Her hand came to Ainz's shoulder. My Kellett has suffered enough, and I feel very strongly about Remedios. She has done some terrible things. But at least some of those are my fault, my folly. Ainz straightened up and began to drum his fingers on his thigh as he thought the matter over. The Queen of Frost is the one she offended. I am not the one who needs to be convinced. Granting her far more than she asked for may help, but from what has been said, the death of her envoy is the true cause of the war. Then offer me instead, Kellett shouted, snapping up straight to her knees, offer my life for my stupid sister. If the Queen of Frost will accept me as a substitute, then we can end all this. I don't mind dying for my family. Even if she is stubborn and pig-headed. Neither of the royals said anything. You could strip her of her honors, confine her to a monastery forever, at least. At least then she would get to live. She'll never change, but I don't want my elder sister to die. She genuinely believed what she did was right. Kellett ran out of more steam than Kalka had moments earlier, and began just repeating herself. Please. 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 There may actually be a solution here, Ainz said at last. However, you would have to give Remedios Custodio up to me. Kalka and Kellett darted their eyes toward the Allfather. She may not be happy, but I can promise her life at least. I can't promise, however, that the Frost Queen's response to either this or to Kellett's offer will be favorable. Ainz's words were said with reticence, and both gave him questioning looks, but Ainz said nothing more than, you will have to trust me. And remained quiet until their heads bowed and they accepted his offer. I give you my Remedios. Save her life if you can, and I will be forever grateful, Kalka whispered, while Kellett could say nothing through her quiet weeping. Volume 6 C34. Albedo sat in the temple confessional. Finding the right time to meet the right priest was easy for one of the three geniuses. He made no secret of taking his place, settling in on the cheap wooden stool. He cleared his throat and said, I'm sorry I'm late. I hope I haven't kept you. I speak for the principal movement now, and there are often questions after. The what? Albedo asked, raising a brow he couldn't have seen through the little wicker screen that divided them. Principal movement. We're trying to purge the corruption and criminal elements within the city by exposing it to the authorities, helping the crackdown and the royal investigators. I began it some time ago and it has taken flight since," he said with a hint of pride in his voice. "It's all thanks to one curious visitor who warned me and opened my eyes." He was briefly wistful, then chuckled a bit and sighed. "Never mind, please. How can I counsel you? Will this be a confession? Should I just listen? What would you have of your priest?" "We met before, priest," Albedo said as she filed his words away in the back of her mind. "Only briefly. Perhaps you recognize my voice?" she asked. He gasped from the other side. "Good, you do. The man of whom I spoke, I had my first kiss with him." He accepted it. Albedo lovingly caressed her lips and suppressed the moan of desire she wanted to let free, but he wouldn't take it further. "I think he is close, but he is also different from the man who I once knew." Albedo could feel his quiet uncertainty, and she searched for words that would hold meaning for him. "He is human. And change is a very human thing, isn't it?" she asked rhetorically, and when he cleared his throat to speak, she fell quiet. "I understand, I think. The way you described him, between before and now, I admit, he sounds inexperienced with women, afraid he might hurt you, perhaps as much, if not more, than he already has. He must care for you very deeply, to be his own obstacle to happiness within reach," the priest said with a pitying sigh. "Nothing I can tell you is a magic spell, but you love this man who cared for you after your father vanished." "Yes, even though it has been so long, I have not forgotten your story. It moved me. If I had a sure answer, I would give it. But what I can say is, you would have loved him no matter what. Am I wrong?" "No, you're not." Albedo instantly shot back. She inched closer to the screen that divided her from the priest. Her breath quickened, but she kept it quiet. "Make that clear to him. Show him that what he did, in the end, did nothing. If others care for him as deeply, as must be the case, show that you're different only in how you want to express it," the priest advised in an almost forlorn voice. His hand touched the wicker as if to reach through to offer her comfort, his palm flat against it. He added, "If there is no more, I wish you the luck of the gods, and blessings to fall on a happy union." Albedo thought over what he said. The man has a point. Every one of us loves our Lord. Any one of us would give our bodies, hearts, anything to him. I'm no child anymore. If I ever was. Perhaps. A slight change is in order. Then she rose to her feet. "You've performed a great service to me, priest," she said with an imperious look down at the divide between he and she. "My Lord's will is to give evil for evil, and good for good. We will not meet again, but all debts are repaid by his will." The priest was rocked to the core by the power of the woman's voice who washed over him. Stunned to silence by its perfection, he heard her leave the booth, and part of him craved to do the same and have a look at her. "No. This works because we are never known to each other. I must stay true to my vows." He clamped down on his impulse with iron resolve, and waited out the rest of his shift in patience. When Albedo departed the booth, she made her way out of the temple. The design of the interior was nothing significant, mostly empty, wasted space, long benches for sitting and an old stone altar on which the small statues of their gods waited for veneration. Fools. Venerating dead stone while a living god walks our world. She thought and restrained the urge to spit or smash the false idols, and forced herself to walk outside again. The day was coming to a close. By now my lord has mated with that human female. She almost had to laugh at that, if she knew of all that has led to this moment. Oh, the beautiful irony. But still, she is at least a useful pet for my lord. And perhaps that helped bring down his barriers. Albedo stood at the top of the temple steps and looked over the quickly dying light of the city. Hobart was a bustling place in spite of everything. People passed by on horseback, in carriages and even more on foot. Most seemed anxious, hurrying on small steps, eager to get where they were going as if fearing some danger was near. With 2 invasions, I'm not surprised, she thought, and the smile spread out across her face, remaining there as she chose to walk to her destination. The darkness fully set in over the city when she reached the inn she'd been staying at, then stopped when she saw guards moving in and out of the entrance and milling around in idle chatter nearby. Did they really catch on that fast? I didn't expect a deduction about where to look until we were gone. Albedo thought, slightly impressed. They must have a few competent people in this pit. She made a mental note to find out the source of the deduction, and then approached to speak to a guard. Let's see what I can learn. she decided, and approached one of the guards in a way men were born to notice, with a sultry roll of her hips with every step and a most inviting smile. Ileana couldn't count the hours hidden in the barrel. The minutes blurred together, and she huddled against herself, her arms wrapped around her knees, her head resting in the space between, struggling to keep her silence. Her struggle was only partially successful. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry," she whispered the words of apology to the dead, while marveling at it at the same moment. How many were there? 20? 30? More? She fought them all to let me run. I should have stayed with you. Should have stayed. Words of that sort came out in whispers, whimpers, thoughts, and tears without stopping until she detected the change in temperature. The cooling night, it was followed by an even greater deepening darkness. With this, Ileana silenced herself, listened for anyone nearby, and sensing nothing, punched the top of the half-rotted old barrel and popped it off. It clattered to the stone and unwashed muck of the alley, but at that moment the noise was no problem. Ileana put her hands to the top, pulled herself out and landed on the damp cold stone. She crouched, listened, tilted her nose up to sniff the air, her ears flicking around. She grew quiet. "You can't undo this. But maybe my mistress can." Ileana encouraged herself and wiped her nose and face on the back of her cloak's sleeve. She covered her head with a hood to hide her ears and dashed out of the alley. There was only one thing she needed. She made her way through the streets as casually as she could. The bustling city still had people either working or leaving their work, drinking or lazing about. It was a very living place, but nobody paid any mind to one hooded woman out of many. Indifference and neglect was her ally, and Ileana exploited both to their fullest. Pausing periodically to let her sense of smell guide her, she wandered into the commercial district and searched until her eyes spied what she needed. Like most buildings, it was made of a mix of wooden boards and stone, and not really built to stand the test of time. This one, though, was finer than the others, a reflection of the cost of its goods, as it had an actual large glass window, and the sign hanging over the door was finely painted and multicolored, not just a crude black drawing of an anvil or other nonsense. It was a portrait of a series of scrolls sitting upright in a cauldron. A magic shop. More importantly, Ileana could see that the lantern outside was snuffed out, and it was dark inside. Fear thudded through her heart as she walked the area several times. The bustling of people made it easy for her to go back and forth. She had to stop every now and then, rest against a wall, wait for those who saw her, pass by, and then go the other direction while nobody realized she was watching the place or its neighbors. The few other shops shut down one by one, their owners blowing out their lantern lights and locking their doors. The buildings were all close together, but every few shops or so, a small alley ran between them to allow passage for pedestrians to cross from one street to the other without taking the long way around. This offered her the opportunity she needed. Ileana walked into one of the narrow passages and looked to her right. The rear of the shops were visible, some with private entrances, many with rubbish bins outside. She put her hands around herself, hugging her body, and clenched her eyes tight shut. "Skana, if you can see me, if you can help, please, one more time. I need you." She prayed that the spirit of her companion would offer her aid, and then she began to dart from building to building in the back. It was narrow, barely enough for someone her size to even manage. But each building offered concealment from stray eyes on the main street. Her nose guided her to the shop that would have potions and scrolls. The faint odor of on-site work was far thicker in her nostrils than it would have been in those of a human. She crinkled her nose in disgust at the odor, but carried on until she reached the back. Breaking in proved far easier than she expected. It had a rear entrance, but the door was old, and the latch for the lock was half-rotted. She took out her dagger, jammed it into the little gap, and pulled like a lever until the old wood splintered, and she could pull the door open. Mind the window, Ileana told herself. Her breathing was shallow and as quiet as possible, but her pounding pulse and racing heart told her it had the noise of a hurricane. She dropped to a crawl that kept her behind the counter and then set her back to it. On the wall was a long series of small cubby holes, each filled with scrolls, each with a little wooden nameplate to identify what was where. Ileana's keen elven senses had no problem reading the names in the dark, and she quickly found the scrolls she sought. She rose to a crouch, darted her hand up, snagged the single, costly roll of paper in that particular cubby, and pulled it down as fast as she could. She dragged herself on her belly over the rough wooden floor. "Stay calm, you're almost out, almost." Just get back to the street, she told herself again and again, and then, before she knew it, she was in the little used byway between the two main city streets. She was just another person, one of many. A smile of sheer pride was on her face when she tucked the scroll away into her pouch, and she wore that smile all the way to the nearest isolated alcove she could. Then she yanked out the message scroll, used it, and reached out to Albedo. "Mistress," she cried out in desperation, the emotions of the day boiling over, "something terrible has happened." "Calm yourself, Eliana, I am at the inn now, the guards just informed me of their aid." Albedo's voice came back with the same strength and confidence that brought Eliana such constant reassurance. "I understand, my lady. I am safe, but Skarna, she." Eliana struggled to keep from bawling as she relayed the story, and when it was over, Albedo answered her. "Then there is only one thing left to do, and our work is done. We will recover her body, but I will leave that to some of our other tools. Your work here is done. Meet me behind the great temple of the city, and I will take you away from here." Albedo gave the order, and then the connection died as it was cut. With her mistress' orders received, Eliana began to walk. Volume 6 C35. Astrika watched the panic on the walls of Prat with grim satisfaction. They were scrambling like mad, and he couldn't blame them. After all, nobody expected him to go this far north. They thought I would go for Hobans, or they thought I would turn around and deal with Gustav. They slept. And now I've woken them up. And there's nothing like an army at the gates to wake someone up quickly. He raised his hand, and lowered it before him as if he were swinging an axe. Most of his army was still not in position, but he intended to compound their fear and horror. The ballistae, scorpions, and small catapults were readied and fired from wherever they were. Astrika whistled as he watched the sharp straight flight of the giant arrows, the round stone launching ballista, and the long high arc of catapults. "Speed is armor." Astrika recalled the phrase of his mentor and shouted for the lines and ladders. "Sloppy," he admitted to himself as warriors scrambled to follow the sudden orders. Thankfully, the walls were thinly populated, the hour was late, most of the city's protectors would be drinking or eating. Catch them now. They're unready. If I wait to form lines they'll be twice as strong. His soldiers were following orders, the alarm bells were going off all over the city, the steady and unbroken clanging noise was drowned out by the screams of the population. The stampede of humanity ran all over the long roads. Somewhere, some soldier was shouting at his commander that they were under attack. Somewhere, a civilian of some sort was shivering in fear and disbelief. The long lines of soldiers bearing high ladders rushed past on all sides. The impact of stones and long arrows on the defenders was notable. They froze briefly with each impact. "Garrison," he thought, but each time they froze, it was only for an instant before they returned to their tasks when each rumbling strike ended or each shot went overhead to crash down into the city below. Howls of pain were carried through the air, some from his own as the first ranks came near to the top of the ladder and were forced to fight against clusters of defenders. A man fell screaming from the top when the line he was on was cut and then went silent when he landed with a thud. He was not alone, others fell from their line as they scaled the wall, only for more lines to replace them. A ladder began to fall back as men holding a long wooden pole pushed it away. The men high up cried out, they begged, they pleaded, their voices carried even to where Astrika sat on his horse, and he watched. Mercy was not coming from those on the wall. The ladder fell, some clung to the wood. Others jumped and tried to grab the air, praying to the silent four gods that a hand would come out and catch them. Some fell screaming and clutching at broken legs, others did not scream at all, and a few rushed to the next ladder to attempt to climb again. But the scarcity of defenders and the suddenness of the assault gave Astrika the edge he needed. For every ladder that fell and every line that was cut, 4 or 5 more remained in place and his soldiers roared out their courage as they fell on their outnumbered enemies. More and more were taking ground, swords went up and men fell down, the scent of blood grew thick enough to reach his nose, and his household banner rose atop the wheelhouse. Wails went up from the city, the noise redoubled, the gate began to grind open as his soldiers did their work. My conscripts and militias might not be worth much, but my household troops, they are a whole other matter. Astrika's smile of pride spread wide on his face and vanished when he drew his sword and raised it overhead. Cavalry, he shouted, charge. His squire blew the horn to sound the cavalry charge, and he stormed toward the entrance. It was more open to his entry than a horse starting her shift. The cavalry came first, but behind him he could hear the noise of drums calling for the infantry advance, and out of the corner of his eye before he entered the city he could see those who had been climbing ladders, descend and follow the easy path into the city. His sword slashed out at a half-dressed soldier with a slightly drunken look on his face, the blade cut across the unhelmeted head, and then his body smashed into the charging horse. He fell thudding and bouncing away. Astraka didn't see him again. There was only one destination. Take the royal governor, and the whole thing falls. What could possibly be easier? And their soldiers charged on against the flimsy, unprepared defenses. Vijar watched the battalion of Holy Kingdom soldiers on the march. Our queen was right. They're on the road, and just the way she said. Horsemen at the front, archers in the middle, infantry at the rear. The Spriggan scouts kept a close watch from the forest, playing to their strengths. They kept well out of view and reported only through animal noises, avoiding the use of magic that most assumed got their brethren caught before. He continued to watch while the humans made camp, daylight creatures. They slept in the darkness that many of his demi-humans thrived in. The camp was orderly, tents went up and formed a circle, horses all confined to one place near where their riders slept. Soldiers took evenly spaced watch positions that all covered each other and set fire stakes at a distance that would illuminate movement. My queen's point is well taken. Order. Discipline, these are weapons too. Vijar reluctantly admitted, thinking back to his people's customs everything was haphazard, chaotic and resolved with blows that slowed progress down. It was hard not to think of her other innovations. A trio of elders chosen at random to judge, and none know which is which but by writing. The various elements of her judgeship held the bloodshed down, and fewer deaths meant more workers, more warriors, and more magic casters spent more time in training. The rising castle and the city around it. Why tower above a mere warrior or two when we can tower above nations? Her speech won many over, and there were some who wanted to tear it all down. He let out a low growl, raised his axe, and waited. The human numbers declined as they slipped down into slumber. The spider folk were doing their part, and the Nagani were ready to do theirs. Stone spitters lay crouched and ready for the first volley, angled to create a funnel. And then he felt the hand, carapace-like and smooth, touch his back. He let out a monumental roar, and the stone spitters sprang up. Their rocks were not very large, but shot at high speed, and humans howled like wounded wolves as they went down. From there the Spriggan casters shot up. Rather than fireballs that would provide light to the humans, they used water spells and doused the flames to plunge the humans into the darkness. Vijar charged into the camp, bellowing war cries that ripped through the courage of lesser men. The disciplined ones in the human ranks quickly tried to form up lines in the dark. Their forms, grey and white to his night eyes, were more successful than he would have thought. Where are they? How many? The orcs and the Zin fell in on the left of the camp, hacking and dissolving whatever they could. The noise and shrieking of warriors kept the humans off balance, and Vijar's blood sang with joy as he got to do what he did best. His axe sliced through a human neck and sent it spinning away into the darkness, the body falling as a lump to the dirt before he moved forward to the next group. Light began to fill the camp as paladins used spells to give them the means to see. A fireball soared out into the darkness and a hissing scream of an unfortunate snakeman was joined by the smell of roasted meat and another lump of dead flesh joined with the earth beneath their feet. More hits along vast parts of their line of camp. The disarray grew only worse. Soldiers fumbled with shields in the dark, struggled to find comrades. The order was broken, and discipline with it. Even still, Vijar's advance seemed like it took forever. Humans began to break ranks, and flee. The noise of armor retreating replaced the noise of armor advancing, while the sound of screams of fear replaced the noise of humans barking orders and humans shouting challenges to their enemies. Without their discipline, this is easy. Vijar thought as he watched the ranks begin to break and run through flames. Men abandoned their comrades in their desperation, leaving bonds of friendship and blood behind in an effort to save themselves. The battle, with the sprays of human blood flying through the air and limbs sailing into the night like tumbling bugs flicked away, had become a massacre. Secure the survivors, he bellowed as the noise of fighting slowly began to die down. The groans of the wounded, human and non-human alike, were plentiful. Even at night, at a disadvantage. They made us pay a price for victory. He reflected on that while cleaning human blood off his axe, wiping the red stains away with the banner of the Holy Roble Kingdom. Plunder their camp, and make one of our own. Short rest only, then we get moving. We have a queen to join. And a capital city to take. Vajar roared his cry of victory and savored the smell of fear off the human captives as crude bonds were formed from tent ropes and stakes, and the demi-humans began to divide up the winnings from their victory. The humans lay slumped forward, many bleeding, heads bowed, while stakes were hammered down into the dirt. It wouldn't offer good security, but under watch, the humans would be slowed. A few screams reached the new camp, coming from deep in the woods, as humans were reminded why they shouldn't venture there without weapons. Now for the next part of Her Majesty's plan. Vajar let out a low, vicious laugh as he trod on thunderous footsteps with his tail lashing behind him when he passed the defeated soldiers. While Naya did not enjoy fire like she once did, its warm orange tongues licking the air, its vibrant little sparks briefly defying cold in the air before their lives were snuffed out, she did find that she still liked hot food. She sat around the center of her camp and tore at a haunch of roasted venison with her multitude of sharp teeth. This body makes meat-eating even easier, and it tastes better too. She licked the juices from her lips and listened to the Xian prince tell his story. Z, as she'd come to call him, was something of an amorphous blob, but he had a sly, understated sense of humor that never failed to bring a smile to those who took the time to listen. So then she said, "You think you're slimy? Hold my beer," he said, and the mixed array of forces fell to laughing. Naya's wings beat a little harder when she chuckled, and she slapped her knee repeatedly before holding her other hand out when a stone spitter approached to hold out a mug of pillaged beer. "Your Majesty?" he said, and she gave a grateful smile to the stone spitter that probably looked more fearsome than she meant it. "Thank you," she said, tempering his sudden freezing in place as if he'd done wrong. After he heard her words, he bobbed a little in the way his lumpy, stone-like race often did when they were happy, and withdrew. Naya turned back to face the other chiefs and princes who made up her current retinue. The chatter was amiable, and went on and on as the dying of the last embers returned night's dominance. It happened so suddenly that Naya didn't even notice it. She went quiet during the next round of laughter from the array of demi-human races. For just a second, their faces, bodies, all seemed to have melted away in her eyes. It was just like... It's like what I saw with the others, the paladins, the squires, even village trainees. They were like that with comrades. Wait. Do I have comrades? She cried out inside her head. Her body snapped straight and she stared around the flames which, one by one, faces lost their variations of laughter and fell quiet, staring at their now silent queen with eyes that went into various modes of concern, from wide to narrow according to their race. "Your Majesty?" Z asked, "Is something amiss?" Naya snapped out of her daze and vigorously shook her head. She drained her mug, tilting her head back to take every bit of amber-dark liquid into her throat, then dropped it and bit another haunch of meat away, anything to hide the expression on her face. Chewing audibly, she mumbled out, "No. Everything is wet," she exclaimed, using the stuffed face and to disguise the emotional tone and hoping the fire hid her happy tears. "In fact," she said when she had control of herself and swallowed a large chunk, "I would say this is perhaps one of the best days of my life." Before anyone could ask just why on earth their queen would call a common meal around a fire in the midst of a military campaign of revenge one of the best days of her life, they were interrupted. "Naya," Olisar Dark said, his broad, long head rose from where he lay curled up nearby, his long neck allowing him to loom above her with ease. He didn't address her by title, nor did she ask. She looked up at the dragon and gave him a fang-filled toothy grin. "Yeah, Ollie?" He winced. "No. I refuse that nickname. If you must shorten it to Sir. I understand that is a respectful term at least. Ollie makes me sound like one of those performing clowns that humans use to entertain their offspring." Naya chuckled. "No problem, Olisar Dark. What is it?" she asked, and he winced again as she refused his chosen nickname. From anyone else, it might have been a horrendous breach worthy of turning them into a meal. But her hands had cleaned his body, her fingers sewn his wings, her bleeding body scavenged for things to nurse him back to health. And now his blood was in her veins. So he confined it to a mildly annoyed flinch. Finally reaching the matter at hand. "There are people coming. Stealthy, and they do not smell like any race I know." Olisar Dark rumbled the words out, and the whole campfire froze. Are they close? Naya asked. In the camp, though even human gods only know how. And their gaze is fixed on you. He muttered. They could be the servants of the Queen's new ally. But if they're not hostile, or if they are... Wait, let them come to me, Naya whispered, and when she relaxed, so too did the others.